Hey everyone, Anthony Venuto here with InTouch Mortgage Solutions. It's Friday, Finance Fridays, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about the federal budget 2023 as it pertains to housing and future home buyers, and what's up with the foreign buyers amendments. Stay tuned, you don't want to miss it. Earlier this week, we heard from our Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, who tabled the budget for 2023. And I want to take an opportunity on this episode to talk about two specific items in that budget that I think are of very importance for Canadians who have mortgages and who have or are Canadians that are looking to purchase a home in Canada. And the other thing I would like to touch upon is the foreign buyers ban, the amendments that are being made or that were created in order to allow non-Canadians to purchase homes in Canada, coming off the fact that the ban was just initialized back on January 1st, 2023. Let's kick off by talking a little bit about Budget 2023 and the $43 billion spend that will basically take place over the next 6 years has definitely faced a lot of criticisms amongst Canadians who believe that a lot of their concerns were not addressed in this budget, and especially surrounding items like housing affordability, and the creation of new housing supply. These are some major pushbacks that we're hearing from economists and other strategists in the media. Now, obviously there are major concerns, major headwinds there. There are obviously some major products or major incentives for Canadians, depending on where you are, what walk of life you're in. But I want to take the opportunity and talk about two specific items. One being the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada putting in guidelines for mortgages, for the banks to help Canadians who are finding themselves in exceptional situations who require relief. So what does all that mean? Firstly, I think it's important to understand the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada is a watchdog. They are basically a federal agency who monitors and protects consumers in the banking space. They also provide financial literacy. It is a consumer protection agency. And the fact that they're actually putting into the budget measures or guidelines that will help Canadians and banks ensure stability with their mortgages to keep them in their homes basically is a very important piece of legislation, because we already know that the banks were actually doing this already. The banks on their own accord were helping Canadians by allowing them to increase their amortizations well beyond the 25 or 30-year mark. They were allowing clients to up their mortgage amounts, adding back some of those interest costs to their principal balance. And one of the major concerns with this guidelines is ensuring that there's no additional fees or costs or penalties being passed on to the consumer if they find themselves in this exceptional circumstance. But my question is around what is the verbiage, what is being said? They use words like reasonable, they use words like exceptional circumstances. What are these exceptional circumstances and what is reasonable? Is it reasonable to have mortgages amortized 50 to 60 or 70 years? Is it reasonable to increase mortgage balances beyond certain thresholds? Keeping in mind that Canadians purchasing homes right now have to undergo existing stress test rules. Will these stress test rules apply to these Canadians who are finding themselves in this situation? That is something that we endeavor to find a little bit more about as we progress and as we hear more about it. But I do want to address one concern that I know many viewers are actually thinking. And this is something that we've had conversations about is, well, if the federal government, if Ottawa is going to implement guidelines, and if the banks are doing this already, well, what does this mean for the potential real estate market? Because if we don't end up seeing all these homes going into power of sale or foreclosure, and these individuals having to list their homes on the market, especially considering right now that we are still at a 20-year low when it comes to inventory, and we are still facing pretty solid home prices. They have come down from their highs, but are still relatively expensive, especially in the major hotspots. Well, what does this mean for home prices moving forward? Is it going to bolster home prices? Is it going to put a floor under these home prices? These are the questions that we're looking to find out. So what does this necessarily equate to? Well, it's important to understand first and foremost that banks do not want their assets, their portfolios of mortgages and homes to depreciate. They don't want those portfolios to crash because that would put them in a very dangerous situation. And if you recall, OSFI, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, well, their main job is to ensure that the banks remain liquid and well capitalized, and that they've put together, some money, those funds, those $2.5 billion across the board within the major banks to ensure that they have enough money in case a lot of these loans or mortgages goes bad. And all this comes on the tails of what has happened in the US just over the last month as we heard of the collapse of some of the major banks. So these are some major questions here in the Canadian banking system, especially now that it is in writing. What do you think this means for the Canadian real estate landscape moving forward? Now, just as a quick, little point here, part of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, they are talking about increasing that CDIC insurance. Basically, that's the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation. It is currently at $100,000. They're looking at bumping it up. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but those are some of the major conversations. Now, I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the First Home Savings Account, that tax-free savings account that is eligible for Canadians who are under the age of 40 and are able to put aside $40,000 towards the purchase of their first home. Now, this is definitely a great tool for Canadians looking to put money aside who plan to purchase a home in Canada, maybe in the next few years, as you are able to contribute about $8,000 per year. The major question that we're hearing, or the conversation or criticisms are, is $40,000 enough to buy a home in Toronto, Vancouver? Could the government have done more with this particular program? And the questions around what they had done in the past with the first-time home buyers incentive plan. You may recall that's the one where if you purchase a resale home, well, they give you 5% of the equity, or if you purchase a new construction, they'll give you 10%. Well, that particular program failed miserably, especially in the major cities. And that was the question, is like, will the government's program here help Canadians? Is it going to be something that's going to benefit Canadians? Or is it just smoke and mirrors? And that was the conversation amongst many Canadians. Now shifting gears, let's talk a little bit about the foreign buyers amendments, the changes that have come on March 27th. And we definitely heard from CMHC, who's already updated their website to discuss these changes. So the changes came from the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion, Ahmad Hussein. And this is very interesting because just in January of 2023, the foreign buyers ban kicked into effect. And the conversation right now is on whether or not, or why they're walking back these changes, I should say. Was the verbiage or the wording actually, problematic? And is it actually going to do anything in the Canadian real estate market? We've heard from individuals like Benjamin Tal who've come on and said, well, look, and you have to take what everyone says with a grain of salt, but I do believe what he's saying has some merit.
We have to increase the supply of purpose-built rental, not to decline, to reduce it. And that's exactly what's happening. I spoke to tens of players in the industry. They are struggling with that. It doesn't make sense. And I think that it's time to put a lot of pressure on the government to re-examine it. And we have to do it now. You cannot wait for the next 2 years and say it will go away. No, you have to do it now, because every minute that passes costs money and reduces supply in a time when we have to run faster to stay in the same place when it comes to supply.
Doesn't it seem like these details should have come to light maybe before it came into being? January 1st, it took effect, the ban took effect. Why wasn't this talked about previously, Benny?
That's a good question. I really don't have a good answer for that. And I hope that now there is a sense of urgency to move on it, because it's beyond the housing. Let's assume that you are a private equity with a minority stake of foreign investor, more than 3%, and you want to buy a pipeline that happens to go on a zone residential or mix. You cannot do it. Nothing to do with housing. You cannot do this business. You cannot do this transaction. It doesn't make sense. Really, I don't know why it came through, why it happened, but I think that it's not too late, not to eliminate the act, but to fix it. Fix the language, make it make sense.
And he's talking about how a lot of foreign investment is in Canada to help build a lot of these projects. And it's not necessarily that these foreign entities are purchasing single-family homes to the extent that maybe the government believed that they were doing. I think it represents anywhere from 2 to 3% across Canada, and maybe a little bit higher in specific provinces. But the fact that a lot of these companies, a lot of these developments require foreign investment in order to get these projects off the ground. And more importantly, they're talking a little bit more about the actual usage of the land. Work permits. Now, basically, if you're an individual that's coming to Canada with a work permit that's over 183 days, then you're able to purchase a home as soon as you arrive. And previously, you were not able to do that. Under the ban, you were not allowed to purchase a home. You had to wait to either get your permanent residency card, and obviously with 1 million new Canadians being documented in Canada, whether they be permanent residents, work permits, student visas, we do have a major concern here. The argument that we've heard most is that a lot of these companies are looking to bring executive CEOs, major headhunting happening, and in order to entice them to come to Canada, or in order to entice immigration into Canada, well, we need to allow these immigrants to purchase a home, or these individuals to set up their roots here in Canada, and it makes it more enticing if you start to remove the restrictions. But obviously the entire idea of the ban, from what we gathered, was to help Canadians that are already here keep the inventory for the Canadians. And now if we open up this situation, what could happen to the demand side of the equation? Are we going to see a major run on all these purchases because we are facing these lower inventories? That is the question, right? So we will do another episode talking a little bit more in depth of how these foreign buyer bans and the amendments are going to play out as we start to gather more information. Overall, I think it's important to look at what the federal budget is saying, what changes happened this week, once again, from the federal government, and what it means for Canadians and the future of the Canadian real estate market. Let us know in the comments sections below what you think some of these changes could mean for Canada. So we'll leave the video here, hoping that everyone has a great Friday and an even better weekend ahead. Thanks for clicking. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.